You know, I was a college All-American. I was the 1983 second-round draft pick of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the 45th player selected that year. I was a Pro Bowler. I was the 1988 NFL Man of the Year for the Buccaneers. I married my college sweetheart, cheerleader, dream wife, and had two great kids that worshiped the ground I walked on. And I'm the same guy who fell out of that car that night and crawled those last 30 feet through the door. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. I had everything until I didn't. And I remember pulling up to that treatment center that night, and I was so sick and beat up. And I remember somebody opened that car door from the outside, and that's when I just fell out onto the concrete. And I crawled, like I said, I crawled those last 30 feet through the door, and nobody helped me. And I'm glad they didn't, because I needed to do that on my own. And listen, I think I'm a pretty tough guy. I've been in a lot of battles. You don't get to stay in the NFL for 10 years at offensive center unless you're winning most of those battles. But crawling through the door that night, that was the toughest thing that I ever did. And my favorite story about that, I tell this all the time because it's my favorite story, is everybody remembers Pat Summerall, right? Longtime CBS announcer, New York Giant. Pat was a guy that he was a long-term alcoholic and also a guy in long-term recovery. And we were good friends while I was at Baylor in college, you know, and then, of course, when I played in the league. But we reconnected down at 2010 at the Super Bowl in Miami, and he told me the story about his neighbor back in Dallas. And his neighbor was going through organ failure. He was on his third marriage. His new wife was his new drinking buddy, and then things were getting out of control, and he felt like he needed to do something for his neighbor. So he got some guys together from his local home group, and they went over and did a little intervention on him. And 90 days later, when Mickey Mantle was walking out of the Betty Ford Clinic, this is back in the early 80s, there was a crowd of people waiting for him. And as he approached the crowd, somebody said, "Mickey, what do you most want to be remembered for?" And everybody was expecting some baseball-related statistic or something. But Mickey said, "I want everybody to know that my greatest accomplishment in life was getting clean and sober." And that's how I felt that night when I crawled through that door. My greatest accomplishment, even over all the football accolades, the birth of my children, my marriage, everything that I'd been able to accomplish, crawling through the door that night was the biggest thing and my greatest accomplishment. Because if I don't do that, then everything else was for nothing. You know, I was born and raised in right outside of Dallas, Texas, small East Texas town called Tyler. My parents, there was no genetic predisposition at all. You know, there was no environmental reason why this happened to me. I never saw my parents drink or do anything. Brother and sister, the same way. I mean, everything was centered around football in East Texas. Friday night lights, pasture parties, you know, pickup trucks, girls. That was our life back then. Football always came easy for me, and I was able to go anywhere. And some of you remember the old Southwest Conference. Now it's the Big 12. I was able to go anywhere I wanted to, and I chose Baylor. I wanted to play for the great Grant Taft. I met my wife the very first day our freshman year. We went out that night and got married after our junior year. Everything was going so great. There was no indication of what lied ahead for me. I wasn't doing anything crazy in college, but playing football and dating my wife. Football, again, came easy for me, and I was able to be drafted by the Buccaneers in the second round. You know, back then, it's not anything like it is now with draft days and private jets and green rooms and television. It's such a big production, the draft is now. But back in 1983, it was just me and Lydia sitting by a telephone in a one-bedroom efficiency on the campus of Baylor University, waiting for that call. And I can always remember that ring and hearing John McKay on the other end with that old cigar-stained voice of his saying, "Randy, hey, we just drafted you in the second. I'll see you tomorrow." Click. And I was like, whoa, wait, where's Tampa? You know? I was a East Texas country boy that had never even seen the ocean, but we were so excited to be coming to Tampa to not only start our lives together and our family, but my career in pro football. We loaded up everything we had in the back of a small little U-Haul and hooked it up to my burgundy Cutlass Supreme. And out I-10 East we went to start our lives together. I can remember when I got here, and this is at the old Buck place, not too far from here. I can remember having a locker next to Leroy Selman. And this was huge for me because this was a guy that I'd been watching in college, a guy that I wanted to emulate. Everything that he did, he was such a professional, such a great leader off the field. And he'd kick my butt every day on the field. But he was such a great mentor. And I had a locker next to him, and you know, we had a lot of conversations. And this was even before my first training camp. This was like during mini camps after I'd just gotten drafted. And we would have a lot of these deep discussions as I sat next to him. And the first thing I learned from Leroy was that football was not a game anymore. Now it was a job. And the second thing I learned from Leroy was you do whatever you have to stay out on that field. Because if you're not out there in your position, somebody else was going to be. And if you were always on the injury report, if you were always back in the training room being worked on by the trainers, if you were always in line to see the doctor, if you were always missing practice, then that was a reputation you were never going to get away from in what was sure to be a short NFL career. And I'm sure Leroy didn't mean to throw down handfuls of pain pills, of opiates every day, but that's what I was willing to do. And this is how I justified it. You know, I wanted to be the best. I wanted to be a Pro Bowler. I wanted that next big contract. I wanted to feed my family. These are ways that I justified what I looked at like a necessary evil of the league. I mean, I'm getting it from the team doctors, right? So it must be okay. I'm getting it from my team trainers or my teammates. So it must just be the culture of the league, right? These are ways that I justified this necessary evil that was developing into a full-blown addiction. We had a drug safe in the middle of the training room full of narcotics that was never locked. So you could just go get whatever you wanted out of there. And if it ever was locked, we had 3 white guys that started on defense, and their jersey numbers were the combination of the safe. The whole 10 years I was there, it never changed. But not once did anybody ever say, "Randy, why are you nodding off in meetings?" Or, "Randy, why are you late to practice every day?" Or, "Randy, why are you the last to leave the building every night and pills are missing out of the drug safe?" Nobody ever asked me those questions because I was always playing good. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? That necessary evil developed into what the last 2 years of my career. I had a great career. I played for 5 different head coaches in 10 years. But the last 2 years of my career, that necessary evil developed into a full-blown addiction that was causing blackouts. I was playing entire NFL football games in a blackout. As a starting center in the NFL, as the quarterback of the offensive line, getting guys going in the right direction, changing blocking schemes, listening for the snap count from Vinny or Steve DeBerg or whoever was back there, listening for them to audible or change the play. I was the quarterback of the offensive line, and I was doing all this in a blackout. I was taking so much medication. I would be home late at night after playing a 1 o'clock game somewhere in the country or here at the Sombrero. And I'd start coming around. I'd be all scratched up and beat up and bruised and dehydrated and fingernails all torn up, everything you are after an NFL football game. And I didn't remember any of it. I would have to wait and watch it the next day on film with everybody else. And sure enough, again, I always played good. So nobody ever said anything. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I'll never forget after that 1992 season. And like I said, I played for 5 different head coaches, 6 different offensive line coaches. And I remember that last one. I remember after the 92 season, and back then you would come in and you would watch the film. This is after the last game, if we weren't going to the playoffs, which we never did. But you would come in, you'd watch the film from the day before, you'd have an exit meeting with your coach, and you'd clean out your locker and leave. And I remember I was just about to clean out my locker when I felt somebody walk behind me, and right next to my locker was the door that exited the locker room into the coach's office. And as I felt somebody walk behind me. I felt the wind go by. I felt a hand on my shoulder briefly. I heard the words, "Randy, we won't be needing you next year anymore." And all I saw as I turned to look was Sam Weiss hitting that silver bar in the middle of that door and exiting. Didn't even slow down long enough to look me in the eye. And I remember thinking, that's how it ends? All the blood, sweat, and tears that I've left on football fields all over this country since 4th grade, and that's how it ends? And it's not like I expected to have an expressway named after me. or even a cake, you know? But I never expected it to end like that. And I remember just raking everything out of my locker into a black trash bag and walking out the back door, and Randy Grimes, the football player, didn't exist anymore. And the reason I tell that story is because I already had this raging addiction going, this dumpster fire of an addiction. And now you throw in the fact that I'm losing my connection, I'm losing my family, that I'm not the guy in the uniform anymore, that I don't have that playbook to look at, that I don't have that itinerary to go by. That was just throwing gasoline on an already raging dumpster fire, like I said, and it took me a long time to get over that. I lost my connection. People ask me all the time what I miss most about football, and it's not running down that dark tunnel over at the Sombrero and having all those guys behind you, and hearing the clickety-clack of cleats on the concrete and running out into the sunlight behind the cheerleaders. Of course, we didn't have pyrotechnics back then. I think they threw firecrackers, but running out onto the field between the bleachers, under the lights, it's not that. I don't miss the game. I miss the locker room, my connection. And that's what recovery's given me back. It's given me back a locker room. Like-minded people that have been where I've been in this addiction world, the deep, dark places that this thing has taken me and my family. I'm with those people that have cried and laughed and bled and struggled with me. That's my new locker room. This room is part of that locker room. My wife, the perfect storm was coming together. The new normal for me after football was ambulance rides and emergency rooms and detoxes and lost jobs and lost cars and lost relationships because I couldn't get a grip on the opiates. I could not get a grip on the opiates. And the perfect storm was coming together in the spring and summer of 2009. My wife couldn't stand to watch me kill myself anymore, and she had to take a step back. My daughter wouldn't let me come around my first grandchild because I wasn't fit to be around her new baby. My buddy out here that I played with, Tom McHale, passed away doing the same thing I was doing, self-medicating the injuries he got while he played for the Bucks, and one day he just didn't wake up. And I was having seizure after seizure after seizure as a result of withdrawal. And the call that my wife made to the New York office of the NFL, they didn't have anything back then for retired players. No resources at all, but whoever she talked to that day in New York knew somebody who knew somebody, and that's how I got on a plane to West Palm that night, September 22nd, 2009. That's when I fell out of that car and crawled into that treatment center. And I stayed there 90 days, and I did everything that they asked me. I finally had that gift of desperation. Finally had that gift of desperation. And I can remember sitting at a picnic table in the middle of the campus down in Lake Worth. I remember it like it was yesterday, 8:45 in the morning on a Wednesday morning, 15 minutes before the first group was started. I was sitting at this picnic table and I was sobbing uncontrollably. I used to get up every morning while I was going through that process and just write. For some reason, it made me feel better to write. And I'm not a big writer, but I did. You know, what was going on around me, what was happening, how I was feeling, blah, blah, blah. But this particular morning, I was sobbing uncontrollably. And I can't imagine what a 300-pound man in the middle of a rehab looks like, sobbing uncontrollably, but that was me. I couldn't get a grip on myself. Because for the first time in 20 plus years, I was having to deal with on life's term and deal with the huge wake of destruction that I left back in Houston, Texas with my family, with my finances, with my reputation, with my friends. First time, clean and sober. And I can remember thinking, man, I'm never going to get through this. And it was like at that very minute that all this was going on and that obsession to throw pills down and all that was on me, it was like somebody came up behind me and draped a warm quilt around my shoulder. And I say quilt because I remember feeling weight and warmth on me. And right then and there, that obsession to use was lifted off of me. That was my burning bush moment. That was my spiritual awakening, my God moment. Happened at that picnic table. And not only that, but I knew I had to make everything that I'd been through, everything that I'd put my family through, everything, I had to make it mean something. And that's kind of the birth of Professional Athletes in Recovery. Of course, I didn't know what I wanted to do with it then. I had a lot of work to do on myself first, but I knew I wanted to make it mean something. And I did everything they told me to do. I went to 90 days. I moved into a sober living, 49-year-old man, former NFL player, Pro Bowler, moving into sober living with a bunch of 20-something-year-old kids out of the Northeast. But I was still desperate. When that door hit me in the rear end, I was still desperate. I would go back to the treatment center every day, even though I was discharged, and they would let me just kind of hang out because I needed to be around my safe people. I needed them to see my eyes and hear my voice every day. And as a former athlete, that accountability is what I thrived for. I would just pick up cigarette butts on the campus, anything to stay in my safe place. And they allowed me to do that. And I did that for 6 months. That's how desperate I was to stay sober. You know, my family wanted me to come back to Houston, but I wasn't ready to come back. And then one thing led to another, where I am now. You know, I started reaching out to former guys that I'd played with. Guys that I'd played with and against who I knew were struggling out there. And just like me, with that warrior mentality, they were doing it in silence. You know, that big boys don't cry BS, that, hey, rub some dirt on it, get back in the huddle and shut up. the way most of us guys were raised, because our fathers were raised like this, I started going out and reaching out to those guys. And when they heard my story, when they realized they weren't alone, like I thought for so long, when there was some connection, they started coming out of the woodwork. You know, little did I know that not only NFL, but baseball would get involved, you know, the baseball assistance team, you know, and over the year, and pretty much every sport you can think of that has an organization that supports their former players. You know, a motorsport safety group, MMA fighter, PGA, LPGA, you know, the WTA. Pretty much because those are the guys, you know, it's like God allowed all that to happen to me. He allowed for my wife to go through it so that we could be doing what we're doing now. And I'm so grateful. He's kept me connected to a game that I love so much and the people that play the game. And I don't just work with athletes. I'm often accused of boxing myself in. And people think that I only work with athletes. I work with anybody. We were able to write a book recently called Off Center. And the whole purpose of the book was just for a healing tool for my family. Everybody had a platform in it. Everybody had a piece of it, a part of it. And I wanted it to just be a healing tool for the Grimes. Little did I know how good it would be. And we're so proud of it. You know, the hero of my story, and I know I got to wrap it up, but the hero of my story, of my comeback, is sitting right over here in a green dress. She's the one who struggled through it. As we were writing that book, I would start talking about different things that happened, and she'd go, well, no, that's not how it happened. You don't remember how it happened. And she's right. But she's the hero. My family is the hero. They didn't give up on me. We kept that connection. I love what the athletes that I've been able to help, or pretty much everybody I've been able to help since 2009. I love that we still stay connected, that we're a tribe now, you know, that we're family. And most of all, I'm grateful for this program. You know, we're not going to arrest our way out of this. We're not going to legislate our way out of it. But we can educate our way out of it. And we can continue to reduce the stigma that keeps people from raising their hand. And that's what these events are all about. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jen, for the opportunity. I wish I had another 30 minutes, but I'm grateful. Thank you very much.